Hello, my name is Mr. Polk and welcome to my kitchen. Today we would like to take a look at making custards. Now you can make a baked custard where you mix the egg and everything, put it in a pan and a water bath and bake it in the oven. Or we can make a cooked custard, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make a custard where we're going to heat the milk, we're going to temper it into the eggs, put it back on the stove, and we're going to gently reheat it, which is going to cause the eggs to coagulate, the protein to coagulate. It's going to thicken, and it's going to make a really rich and really creamy custard. So to get started, we need to heat up our cream until it just comes to a boil and then turn it off. So we're going to use milk. We're going to start with about 3 cups of milk. So we'll put milk into our saucepan here. I have a 2-quart saucepan. And then in with the milk, we're going to go ahead and put in about a 1/4 cup of white sugar. And then we'll give that a quick whisk. And then we'll get that started on the stove. And then as that boils, I want to take a look at showing you how to prepare the egg base that this liquid is going to temper into. So the first step of the custard is to get your milk and a little bit of the sugar up to a boil and then turn it off. Your second step is to prepare your base. And one of the first things you're going to want to put in there are eggs. And this recipe calls for 2 whole eggs, and then it calls for 1 egg yolk, which is going to add to the color and to the richness of the custard. So I just want to show you separating an egg in case you've never done that before. You go ahead and crack the egg. And I always do this in a small dish. I never do it over top in case you make a mistake. And then you gently open the egg, and however it opens, in my case, it opens up just a little bit there, which is actually really nice, because all I do is go back and forth, and then once it separates, then you go ahead and put the yolk in there. And you always do it separate like that in case it breaks on you or you don't have the right amount of separation or whatever, and that way you can fix it without ruining everything you're working on. Then the next step is to get all this stuff together. So we're going to put in our eggs, the whole egg, okay, and then the yolk. Then we're going to add just a little bit of salt, and then we're going to add, and that's 1/8 of a teaspoon, and then we're going to add a 1/2 cup of milk, and then whisk that together. And then into that, there's 2 things that allow a custard to thicken. The first is the egg, and the second is the cornstarch. Now, as you've learned before with some things, cornstarch just can't go directly in. Otherwise, it's going to get clumpy and lumpy. So we need to make a slurry. But most of you are used to making the wet slurry, where you take the cold water and then you add the cornstarch to it. But we can do a dry slurry too. We can take our sugar, and that's 1/3 of a cup of sugar and a 1/4 cup of cornstarch. Okay. And then we can just sort of whisk that together. And now we can go ahead and whisk that. I'll move this in the middle. We can whisk that right into our stuff. So just pour that right in there. And then we can whisk it in. Now, this is going to serve as the base for our custard. So when the milk comes to a boil, what we're going to do is we're going to temper it. Tempering it means that we're going to slowly incorporate the hot liquid into the egg to raise and gently raise the temperature of the egg. What we don't want to do is if we poured it all right in, that boiling hot liquid right in there, we'd make scrambled eggs. And if we scramble the eggs, what happens is when you're making something like a custard, it's what we call it separates. Those little bits of egg in there would separate and fall out, and you wouldn't have that creamy consistency that you expect to have in a pudding. So we got this all mixed up. All right. As soon as our cream comes to a boil, we're going to go ahead and temper it in. Okay, so now that we have our milk and our sugar mixture, it's come to a boil. When you do that, please be careful. Don't let it boil over. It's very easy for it to boil over. We're going to take a small ladle, and then just 1 ladle at a time, we're going to slowly pour it into our mixture. And again, this is called tempering. And again, if we just poured that hot liquid right into there, it's going to simply start to scramble our eggs. Anytime you do a custard, you're going to do this method. Anytime that you have to bring the temperature of eggs up, you're going to have to do it slowly like this. So as long as you temper anywhere between a half and 2/3 of the liquid, then you're good. What I usually do is I kind of temper it until I can't really get the ladle to pick up anymore. Okay, or you just can tell that you're down close to the bottom. But by doing this isn't something you rush, and this is why you like to use the ladle, because it does sort of slow you down. But once you feel that you've done about 2/3 of the liquid, then you can go ahead and just simply pour the liquid in. And so this would be the third step. As we heated the milk, we made the base, we now tempered it. Now it has to return back to the stove, and it needs to thicken. It's not going to come to a boil, but it's going to thicken. So we're going to pour the liquid back in. Always check your pot. If you feel that your pot scorched on the bottom, then grab a clean one, because obviously if it's already starts a little scorched, it's going to get even more burnt. And now of all the steps of making the custard, the next step is the trickiest, because you have to stir this so that it thickens, but it doesn't clump and it doesn't over thicken. So let's go ahead and get this mixture back on the stove. So once you have it in the pot, you have it over like a low medium heat. You're just going to keep constantly stirring it like this, and I like using the rubber spatula here so I can get all the way to the bottom and scrape everything off. When you notice that it starts to get the little clump at the bottom of your spatula, you know it's starting to thicken. A couple more signs, and it takes a while to thicken, but then once it does, it thickens very quickly. A couple ways that I could know this is getting closer is you're starting to see steam come off of the pot, so that means it's getting hot. And notice that when I tempered it, I had all of those air bubbles in there. Now, because of the mixture getting hot, all the air bubbles have popped. So that definitely lets me know that I'm getting closer. And I can feel the liquid itself getting thicker. And once we get it to where we want it, we'll take it off the heat and switch to the whisk. We want to let it thicken. It's not going to come to a boil, okay? But what we want to do is we want to let this thicken until it gets to the consistency of about like mayonnaise, okay? And then that way, if you let it come to a boil, your custard or your pudding is going to be too thick. All right, now I know it's hard to see in the camera, but I can feel that this is starting to thicken, okay? And then once it starts to thicken, I know it's not going to take long. So what I'm doing is constantly scraping the bottom of the pot, because if I didn't, anything left on the bottom is going to burn. So I just want to keep going. All right, now it's starting to get like a melted milkshakey kind of thing. But we want to take it to where, like I said, it feels like mayonnaise. And I know that's weird because we're making a pudding, but that's kind of that consistency. So I'm just going back and forth here, knowing that very soon it's just going to thicken up all at once. Just by watching me stir here, and we're almost done, just by watching the stirring changing, I think you can see that it's thickening, because what's happening is you're going to notice that you don't see all that motion as much. Okay, before it was like mixing water. Now we're definitely mixing a custard. And if it does take a long time, just stay with it. Don't make that mistake of trying to turn up your heat, because it's going to happen too fast. Okay? So we're just about there. I can feel it thickening now as I go, and I can also see a couple more clumps on the spatula. So we're almost at that point when it's going to feel, like mayonnaise. Right now it's kind of like in between. All right, it's not quite that thick. So now I can tell that it's starting to happen very quickly. All right, so I'm just going to keep going. Okay, keep cooking it. And again, we don't want it to come to a boil. If you do this until it boils, it's going to thicken, and it's going to curdle. Okay. So now, I want you to sort of see this thickness now. This is where it's getting to that thickness like mayonnaise. So here's what's going to happen. Let me talk you through it. As it gets to this mayonnaise thickness, which we're almost there, what we're going to do is pull it off of the heat. Okay? And once we pull it off of the heat, then that's the last step in making a custard. And that's the step where you'll put the butter in and you'll put the vanilla in. Okay? So we're pretty much at that mayonnaise-like consistency. So I'm going to quickly take it off of the heat, okay, because I don't want it to cook anymore because it's where I want it. And I'm going to take my whisk. Look at that perfect consistency. You don't see lumps. It's smooth. It's beautiful. And then here's the thing. When we make these types of custards, we're going to go ahead and take our butter, and we're going to put a tablespoon of butter in, and it's off the heat, all right? So it's off the heat, so the butter, it's going to add to the velvetiness of it. It's going to make it very velvety. And what's going to happen is the custard is going to melt the butter, and then we add our flavoring, our vanilla, okay? And you don't want to put the vanilla in while it cooks because it'll lose its strength. So we're going to add our butter at the end. And now you can see that you have a beautiful custard. It's very silky, very velvety. It has that beautiful custard color that just got adjusted by the vanilla and from that eggs and the extra yolk. So now let's look at some things that we can do with the custard. So vanilla custard or vanilla pudding is great because it's very versatile. One thing I could do is I could just simply pour my custard into a bowl like this, and I could just push saran wrap down on it, put it in the fridge and let it set up. Or while it's warm, I could mold it into different things. And I want to show you to do a couple basic things here. One would be if you wanted to make small little pudding pies. This is just graham cracker crumbs, about 1.5 cups. This is 6 tablespoons, 3 ounces of butter, and 1/4 cup of brown sugar. And all I'm going to do is mix it together, and it's going to be the base of a graham cracker crust. So some of you may always buy your graham cracker crust. Here is a way that you don't have to always buy them pre-made. What you're going to do is mix this mixture together, and then you're going to press it into your pie shell. Now, after you press it in, you have 2 options. You could pop it in the oven at like 350 for a couple minutes and bake it. Or if it's going to be a cold pie like what we're making, you can just pop it in the cooler for a couple minutes and let it set up. Either way, you either bake it together or you just put it in the cooler so that the butter gets hard, and then that sets the crust up. Either way, you're going to be able to get a really nice crust. And if you were making something that could use some cinnamon flavor, you could even add some cinnamon to this. But for us, we just did the brown sugar, the crumbs, okay, and then the butter. So now we can make our pie shell. And what I like to do is just spoon the graham cracker into the bottom. And then you kind of work it up to the edges as well. Okay, you want to have a nice base to work with. So we just sort of work this all the way up to the edges, and then set it down, make sure we got our crumb up. And we're not making it square or anything at this time, we're just sort of spreading it out. And then you take another pie tin the same size and you press it in. And that's going to press it all together. Now what I like to do is I like to twist it, otherwise the graham crackers stick. So you press it and you twist it, and then hopefully everything sticks in. Okay, that looks really good. And then you could take a knife or a spatula and just scrape the edges over so it's nice and clean. And then you have 2 options, like I said before. If I'm doing a cold pie like I'm going to do with the custard, I could pop these in the fridge for a little bit or in the freezer so they set. Or if I wanted to, I could put them in the oven. Okay, so now let's look at different presentations. What we have here is we have our custard that sat a little bit, so it cooled slightly. And when it cools, we want to just give it a little stir. And then what we're going to do is put it into our various little dishes and vessels here. And one of the first things I want to make is just this classic notion of a banana pie. And I'm going to put a little bit of custard on the bottom. Okay. And then we're also going to do some of these little verines in the glasses. So I'm just going to ladle a little bit of custard on the bottom. And then in this guy, is a taller one, we'll ladle some custard in. Now, you could just fill this all the way up. If you didn't want to get fancy with the fruits, you could just fill these all the way up to the top of it like little custard dishes and put them in the fridge. And then now for our bananas, what we're going to go ahead and do is press our bananas right into the custard. So we've got our graham cracker, and we've got our bananas. We just, press them in there real nice. It's important to press them in so that they're covered. Being encased, as we know, bananas turn very quickly. being encased in the custard is what keeps them from turning. And then these guys, these are great. We could add some different fruits there. Here I have some fresh raspberries. Maybe you want to put a blackberry in there. Maybe this guy's going to get some of these sliced strawberries. So put some of those in. And then you can layer it up again. Oop. So now we're going to take our custard, put some more in there. Just a little bit. And again, you just want to make it nice. Now, you could pipe it. If the custard was cold, I'd put it in the piping bag. But since it's hot yet, it flows. Okay, so I don't really have to smooth it that much. Just get it to the edge. Okay, that looks awesome. We can do another one here. Put some right on top of those nanners. Okay, that looks great. And again, the shell, you either could bake it to set it, or you could cool it in the fridge to set it. However you want to do it, or even pop it in the freezer for a little bit. And then this one, I'm going to go ahead and just pour some of my custard over top. And then on this guy, I'm going to give it another layer. So again, the sky is the limit with this. You could make different flavors. So I'm going to pour some more vanilla custard in. And then I just took some Nilla wafers, and I crushed them up, put them in a bag, either run a rolling pin over them or hit them with the meat mallet. And it makes like this dust. And we just put that in there, kind of like a little sawdust type pudding. And then we're going to go ahead and put a little bit more on top. Okay. And then you can go ahead and spread that out. And there you have your desserts. And now you can garnish these. Now these need to go in the cooler to set. Obviously you're not going to want to garnish these guys right now because they're hot. But I have some here that aren't. So these are set up. These I just garnished with a little bit of the crumb on top. And then we can make a chantilly. You can either get, a pre-made whipped cream, or this chantilly, I just take a pint, 2 cups of heavy cream, 2 ounces of powdered sugar, and 1 tablespoon of vanilla. Put it in my mixer. I whip it together till it gets the stiff peaks. And you can pipe, a really nice little rosette on the top, okay, or you can just dollop it on there. These guys, the same thing. Just make them look really nice. And then you can garnish. We've got the fresh fruit, a raspberry, you could do a blackberry. We've got these little strawberry cuts. You could put some of those on, kind of this way. Maybe you want to do a slice of a strawberry, so you could do that. You could do the strawberry fan. Maybe on this one, just going to put the little strawberry that way. Maybe we do some of these blueberries on here as a little contrast. So you can do all kinds of things and just make stuff look really, really nice. And then if you want, you could even dust them again with a little bit of the crumbs. And then the pies are the same way. Now, I'll show you the pies. The pies are still warm, but with the pie is the same thing. You could just do a little rosette in the center there, and then put some of the crumbs, and then sometimes I even do, either make it myself or buy the dried banana chips and put a little banana chip on there. So here you can see a lot of different ways that you can utilize the vanilla custard that you make. And these all obviously have to go in the refrigerator and set. And custard just really kind of works by taking the milk, getting it hot, making your base, tempering it in, putting it back on the stove, stirring it till it thickens. Then you remove it, you add the butter, you add your vanilla, and you stir it until it's nice and smooth. If you're not going to use it right away, put it in another container, fresh saran wrap, press it right to the surface so it doesn't make a skin, put it in the cooler. Otherwise, you can pre-portion it. And these here that are not, that don't have the garnish on, I definitely would put a piece of saran wrap over the top so that skin doesn't form. And then let them sit. So again, you could get fancy with the fruit and the garnish and just sky's the limit. Or you could just simply pour them in the custard cup, and just have them as vanilla pudding. So I'd like to thank you for baking with me today, and I can't wait to bake with you real soon right here in Mr. Polk's kitchen.